Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am so excited this convocation is happening tonight. I will make this brief because I know we want as much time as possible to hear from our gracious speaker, kicking off an exciting and awesome slate of Hispanic Heritage Month programming this year. But I'm Cameron Sweatman. I'm the new Student Programming Coordinator for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at Illinois College, and I'm excited to be with you all tonight, sharing this opportunity to listen and grow with you all as we listen to an awesome speaker. But first things first, a couple housekeeping items. We'll be taking questions via chat, as I think Jeremy's mentioning in the chat area. So insert those as you have them throughout the talk. And then we'll see which ones we can get to after Comptroller Mendoza makes her remarks. And please don't forget to complete your reflection questions as well and submit those. But enough of these boring things, on to the main event. So tonight, again, we have the pleasure of hearing from a history maker, to hear from the first Hispanic person independently elected to statewide office in Illinois. She's overcome obstacles and found success in her own way, in large part by choosing action over inaction throughout her academic and working career, which she's going to get into here, I'm sure. She's someone who has lived in competition on the soccer field and the campaign trail, but also a life and career in collaboration with optimism for the future. So on behalf of Illinois College, it is my honor to introduce someone who has given much in fervent service to the communities of our state, our Illinois Comptroller, Susana Mendoza. Thanks so much for being here. Comptroller Mendoza, take it away.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I truly appreciate the warm welcome and introduction. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you, especially kicking off our Hispanic Heritage Month, of which, of course, I'm very proud of my Hispanic heritage. But I truly am delighted that the team at Illinois College invited me to speak with you tonight. I'm getting video bombed by my son, David, not part of the original intention here, but okay, David, I gotta do my speech. Say hi to everybody.
Hi, I don't want to be here.
This is what happens in pandemic days with Zoom, right? I mean, obviously I would have loved to be there with you in person in Jacksonville for the event, but as you can see, I do truly have an 8-year-old son here at home with me who is unvaccinated. And so, as you can imagine, like so many other parents out there who are in a similar situation, I am still limiting my public appearances until we can get the vaccine approval for children, which I really hope and pray comes sooner than it is on the docket so far. So, but I do want to be on the record saying that I hope I get invited to visit the college in person again someday in the very near future. In the meantime, we are very lucky to obviously have great tools like Zoom that make it so easy for us to be together virtually and have a great discussion. And I will be very excited to answer your questions a little bit later in the program. So think about what you want to ask. But first, I do want to spend some time talking to you tonight about leadership and the cost of doing nothing when challenges or opportunities come our way. You know, as you know, I am one of the more than 2.3 million Hispanic people who live in Illinois. My parents immigrated to the United States from Mexico in the 1960s. My oldest brother was born in Mexico, and my other brother, who's a little bit older than I am, the second, was born in Chicago along with myself. When I was young, we lived in Chicago's Little Village community on the southwest side of the city of Chicago. Little Village was a neighborhood in transition at the time. It was home to many first and second generation Mexican families like mine. These were proud, hardworking families who had an eye on joining America's middle class. My father, he was a pipe fitter at Brock's Candy Factory. I don't know if you guys have heard of Brock's Candy, but trust me, I have the cavities to prove it. And unfortunately, street gangs had also established themselves in Little Village, and violence had become much more common. My brothers had faced pressure at one time or another to join a gang. My oldest brother had wanted to be a cop since he was old enough to walk and talk. So you can imagine that was not a comfortable situation for him. And one night when I was in second grade, the violence hit shockingly close to home. A murder occurred right outside of my family's house. And we were told it had been a gang killing, and it shook my parents to the core, especially my mother. I mean, they simply could not handle the fear of thinking that their kids could get shot while playing outside or walking to and from school. Okay, that means seriously, this is, I hope you guys are laughing at how hard it is to, try to do this stuff with a little guy poking his head in the video screen. Yes, David.
I had no
Okay, I'll
idea
tell you the
about
story.
it.
So be quiet and listen so you learn about your
What?
mommy. Yes. Okay. So anyway, the next day, literally the next day after this happened, my parents, they packed us up and they moved our family out to Little Village, to West Suburb, I should say from Little Village to West Suburban Woodridge. It was 35 miles away and far. At that point, it seemed like, a whole nother country far away from the violence and uncertainty. And my brothers and I would say we're very lucky. My parents, they moved heaven and earth to get us away from the violence. They were determined that we would enjoy a peaceful childhood free of violence and trauma. They borrowed money. They worked multiple jobs and they lived truly paycheck to paycheck. And we didn't have any fancy cars or take elaborate vacations, but we were safe and we were happy in our new community. And it was there that I developed a passion for playing soccer. I started playing when I was just 7 years old, mostly on all boys teams because it was the 80s and soccer and Title IX compliance were clearly not taken as seriously as they are today. So there weren't a lot of options for girls who wanted to play. But I love soccer. Like if I was writing it, I'd say capital LOVE, the whole thing, all caps, soccer. I love the game. I love the competition. And I love that it helped me build character and mental toughness at a young age. I went on to David, yeah, my son's playing now, so I'm very excited about it.
Yay!
I went on to be captain of our soccer team at Bolingbrook High School, and I played offensive center midfielder. So for any of you Midwards out there, go Midwards. I earned All-State and All-Midwest honors both in high school and in college, and I was the first girl to appear on Bolingbrook High School's Wall of Fame, something I'm very, very proud of, if I do say so myself. Now, after high school graduation, I alluded to the fact that I did play soccer in college on an athletic scholarship as well as an academic scholarship at Truman State University, which I loved very, very much. Now, playing soccer throughout my youth, it taught me so much more than just skills and strategy. I learned discipline, respect, teamwork, and leadership, all qualities that I rely on today in politics and certainly in government. And looking back, I know I had a great childhood. I'm grateful every day for the choices that my mom and dad made so that their kids could be safe and be happy and grow up in that safe environment. And much of the success that I've had as an adult can be traced directly back to that moment 40 some years ago when my parents acted to protect their family and the way of life that they hoped and dreamed and had worked so hard for. Their determination and willingness to act when confronted with a challenge ignited the fighter in me. It deepened my desire to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. And it steeled my resolve to chart my own course in life, one that came to include public service. Because what better way is there to protect the vulnerable and right the world's wrongs than by serving the public? As a kid, it wasn't my choice to leave my neighborhood that day. But as an adult and a college graduate, it was my choice to move back to Little Village to try to make a difference. And this is a true story. It was a chance encounter with a poorly written campaign brochure that led me from a career in advertising to a career in public service. In 1994, I graduated from college in Missouri with a degree in business administration. I returned to Chicago to get a job and I moved back to Little Village, the neighborhood that I had always felt as a little kid that I had been run out of. My first job straight out of college was working for the front desk at the Marriott Hotel on Michigan Avenue. And then I worked at an advertising firm that specialized in Spanish language advertising. When I was in college, that's what I thought I wanted to get into. So while I was a business major, I had a concentration in marketing and advertising. Now, this firm had great clients. They had clients like Miller Brewing, that was an account that I worked on, and Coca-Cola, the other account that I was an account exec on. And in the spring of 1995, I happened to pick up a bilingual campaign brochure in which a political candidate who I'd never heard of was attacking his opponent. Again, someone I had never heard of. And as I read the literature, I was surprised and frankly, I was offended to read how sloppy the argument was and how misspelled the whole thing was. I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, first of all, if I ever turned in homework like this in college, I would fail. I'd get an F in class. And then I thought to myself, if this candidate doesn't care enough about my community to take the time to proofread his work in Spanish before getting elected, I could only imagine how things would be if he actually got elected. And I could have simply just thrown the brochure in the trash and gone about my business that day. But instead, I acted. And this is a story I share with all college kids because it truly was like a defining moment in my life. I was so incensed that I called the office of the targeted candidate because it was one of those like mean mailers against somebody telling people not to vote for this person. And again, I didn't know who this person was. So I thought, hey, why not? I called this targeted candidate and I offered to write a rebuttal and he accepted the offer. And I didn't even have a computer back then when I picked up the phone and made that like cold call. But what I did was I stayed up all night at a Kinko's in the neighborhood and I worked up a mock-up of a brochure and I presented it to this elected official who was running for a different seat at the time the very next day. I'd called him up and I said, I can help you turn all this negative publicity into positive, and I'd love to share my ideas with you, but only if you're going to do a rebuttal that you give me a shot at doing it. And he was so taken aback by the phone call that he said, I need to meet you. Can you come by my office tomorrow? And I said, sure. And so that's why I went to Kinko's to work on this rebuttal piece, unbeknownst to him, but I wanted to show up to his office with something to show him. And, staying at a Kinko's till 2 or 3 in the morning because you don't have a computer, that's what people with no computers had to do back in the old days. And you may not be able to relate to that, but I think it's a funny story. But here's the really cool part. That interaction, that phone call, it led to a friendship and later a working relationship with the candidate. And after seeing my passion for working to help people in the community, he eventually encouraged me to run for his old state representative seat in the State House in Illinois. Now, I realized that using a position of power to help make people's lives better was so much more important to me and more meaningful to me than what the design of the new Coca-Cola can was going to look like. It was at that moment that I realized that I had found my true passion. And once again, I acted. I went for it. I was only 25 years old when I first ran for state representative, and I lost my first election, but by only 55 votes. And I didn't give up. That's the most important thing to walk away with here. I lost the first election, but I never gave up. I campaigned nonstop for the next 2 years and was elected to the Illinois House of Representatives at age 28, the youngest member of the 92nd General Assembly. And I went on to serve 6 terms and then become the very first woman ever elected in the history of Chicago as Chicago City Clerk. And in 2016, I became the first Hispanic independently elected, male or female, to statewide office as state controller. And I'm super proud, of course, of the trails that I've blazed for women and Hispanic Americans coming up behind me. And I've had this opportunity to be the first in many things, but I don't want to be the last. But, I guess most importantly, I'd say of all this experience, when I look back on my life, I find it amusing to think that all it took to awaken my interest in politics was one really bad campaign brochure and a phone call to someone I didn't even know at the time. Today, the advertising career that I once thought I wanted is a faint memory because of a spur of the moment decision I made one day 26 years ago, which ultimately led me to my true passion of public service. Remember that a vision without action is nothing more than a hallucination. We have to look forward to the possibilities and the pleasant surprises that can come our way in life if we put our positive thoughts into action. So let's fast forward a bit. As you know, I'm the controller for the state of Illinois, and I'm the state's chief fiscal and accountability officer, responsible for managing all of the state's finances. In the simplest terms, this means I pay the bills, I write the checks that go out to everyone who works for or does business with the state government. I became the controller on December 5th, 2016. It was really an awful time for the state of Illinois because political bickering had taken over at the Capitol, and we were in a prolonged state budget impasse, the longest in our state's history. When I decided to run for controller, people would ask me, why on God's earth do you want to be controller? The job has never been harder. The state's finances have never been in worse shape. Why would you want to do that? And I told them, well, that's exactly why I want to run for controller. Because when I see a problem, I want to fix it. I dive in. I can't stand on the sidelines. I'm seriously allergic to that. And voters, I would say, apparently liked what I had to say on the campaign trail. And they, most importantly, trusted in my abilities, and they elected me ultimately to the job. And as soon as I took office, paying the bills became next to impossible as the impasse, this budget impasse, the fact that there was no budget, it wore on and money in the state's accounts dried up. We were 6 months behind paying hospice centers the day I walked into office. And for those of you who may not know, hospice, it's where people end up going to have a dignified death. It's where they go on their way out, where we want them to be at peace. Nursing homes that care for our most vulnerable seniors, they hadn't been paid in 6 to 9 months when I walked into the controller's office. And many of them were on the verge of closing their doors because the state had not paid them for so long. State payments for special education students were running nearly a year and a half behind, or I should say half a year behind. And there were some businesses across Illinois that had not been paid for a year and a half or up to 2 years. I was staring down a crisis that no one had ever experienced before in the role of controller. There was no playbook or blueprint for how to navigate through it because nothing like this had ever happened before. But I knew that doing nothing was not an option. We had to devise a plan. So I quickly rearranged priorities in the controller's office to make sure that services for the state's most vulnerable got paid first. This included things like mental health services and programs that help children, the elderly, the hungry, and the homeless. I wanted to make a point of resetting the moral compass in the controller's office. My office became a triage unit. Every day, it was an exercise in determining who had been waiting the longest for their state payment, which service provider could no longer make payroll, which small business was about to shut its doors, all because the state had no budget. It was grueling and it was emotionally taxing. And I knew that some large companies would be able to wait for their payments a little longer than some small social service providers could. And that meant I had to prioritize accordingly. And when you consider that lives were on the line, there was no question that human service providers had to be moved to the front of the queue. Unfortunately, for some of them, it was too late. A perfect example with this call would be someone like the Wells Center, an alcohol and drug treatment center here in Jacksonville. The Wells Center had been doing a beautiful job. They've been in operation since 1968 and helped 500 people annually with addiction problems. They were really the only addiction center serving that part of the state. But it was forced to close its doors and lay off its staff in April of 2017 because of cash flow problems caused by what? The state budget impasse. It broke my heart. At the same time, I was managing the fiscal crisis from the controller's office. I knew that it was important to do everything I could to help Illinoisans understand what was happening and why. I publicly went toe-to-toe with the former governor and lawmakers who tried to mislead Illinoisans about reasons for the impasse and its impact on people and communities. I talked to reporters and editorial boards, and I successfully pushed for changes to state laws so that we could bring more transparency to government finances to help us avoid future fiscal crises. I truly believe that transparency is what it needs to take for us to build a road that leads people to trusting and restoring faith in government. And when all was said and done, the budget impasse between the governor and the lawmakers, it lasted 736 days until August 31st, 2017. Illinois' backlog of unpaid bills. That means those are bills that the state of Illinois has received for services that have already been rendered to the state of Illinois. For example, the money that universities get for teaching kids, right? The state contributes to the universities. If we don't pay the universities can close down. they can miss their payments that they need to make, right? So it has a massive, terrible domino effect for the bill backlog to go unpaid. It had reached a peak of $16.7 billion in November that year. That means bills that had not been paid had almost reached $17 billion, an unprecedented, ridiculous mountain of bills. And I'm happy to report that the state is in much better shape today. That's in large part because my office has continued to prioritize payments and we closely monitor the cash flow. We're now able to pay companies and vendors as soon as the invoices land in our office. We've spearheaded transparency reforms like the state has never seen before, and we have been managing the money better than any controller and any administration, and during the most difficult periods of our state's history. And now I don't want to bore you more with details about state government or the budget impasse, but I'm sharing all of this with you to drive home the point that doing nothing in the face of adversity can come with a heavy price tag. When people that loved me said, "Why would you want to run for controller? Don't do it. It's an impossible task." I could have said, "Yeah, you're right. It's too hard. I shouldn't do it." But instead, I took action. I did it, and we're in a much better place for it. And, because of political and ideological differences, our former governor and lawmakers, they couldn't agree on a state budget. So they opted to shirk their duties and do nothing for 2 years. And look what happened as a result. They nearly collapsed state government. They sent companies, schools, and municipalities all over the state into a tailspin, and they made Illinois a laughing stock. So for me, doing nothing in the face of that was not an option. Now, so why did I tell you these 3 particular stories? I shared them with you tonight because collectively, they illustrate why it's so important for leaders to be ready to act when faced with danger, uncertainty, or an unexpected challenge. Doing nothing was never a thought for my parents when they realized street violence had become a threat to their family and their home. On the soccer field, players can't just keep their eye on the ball. They also have to pay attention to what else is happening on the field. How is the opposing team setting up? What are the holes on the field? What are the possible outcomes of the next play? When it was time for me to take a calculated risk and run for office, I took a look at what else was out there on the field and weighed the possibilities for success. And I went for it. I didn't win the first time, but I sure did the second time. And I don't like to sit on the sidelines and passively wait for my life to unfold before me. By contrast, we've now seen in state government what happens when leaders disagree on a path forward and are content to do nothing. Real people suffer and taxpayers foot the bill. So here's my advice for the young people in our audience. Be a leader okay, yes, like you. Be a leader who understands that solving problems means taking action. The cost of doing nothing is tallied in the opportunities we miss, the experiences we never have, and the disappointment of knowing things could have been better if we'd only acted. Bring people together when they're divided. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Be on the lookout for opportunities disguised as challenges. And don't worry if life takes you in an unexpected direction. Reject the notion that you are not in control of your own future, because you are. And with that, I'll stop talking and turn things back over to Cameron. I want to thank you all for having me join you this evening. It certainly means a lot for me to get to share some time with you, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions. So go for it.
Wow, thank you so much, Comptroller Mendoza, and David as well, for your words. I know it's not easy without being able to see the audience and interact, so we really appreciate it. And just know we were all very much with you.
Good.
We have a lot to reflect on here, and I will say I'm just old enough to understand your Kinko's reference you made.
Yeah, I know. I bet you a lot of people don't get it, but it's like a place that people used to go to actually use computers or make photocopies.
Right.
Like so archaic now.
Very important back then, though. And your quote, "Vision without action is nothing more than a hallucination."
Yep.
We might be stealing that one. Just so you know.
Yeah, spread the word. It's so true. I mean, so many people have great ideas of what they'd like to see or what they wish they could have. But if you don't put a plan together and then most importantly, put it into action, it's just like I said, it's a hallucination. It's never going to really happen.
Yeah, it's just a wisp in the wind,
That's right.
Absolutely. Okay, so first question. You talked about how you were activated to participate civically when you saw that political advertisement. Which leaders inspired you in high school or college, and how have they affected your leadership style today?
So when I was growing up, I was so obsessed with soccer. I really did not follow politics very much. I didn't like politicians because my mom and dad are from Mexico, and they did not have a good taste in their mouth about the politics in that country. And so I had always been raised to not trust any elected officials, that, it wasn't positive what I heard in my household growing up as a kid, right? And so the last thing in college that I ever would have thought I'd be doing, when they ask you that question, where do you see yourself in 5 years, which every college kid gets, right? The last place on earth it would have been was running for office to be, the youngest state rep at that time running in Illinois. And so it's just, again, I got bit by this political bug that I never would have seen coming. And it was very inspiring. And I just really fell in love with being able to help people. And then realizing that if you take on these challenges, and, of course, it's not an easy thing to run for office. You definitely have to be confident. You can't shirk away from, you can't not be a risk taker when you do these things. And you can't be afraid to fail, most importantly. And I think that I've always been a competitor. Soccer was much more than just a sport for me. It was really a defining part of my personality and my mindset. And in terms of role models, they were my coaches, besides my parents, of course, which were my first and most important role models. My coaches, I remember always wanting to just play extra hard and earn their respect and their admiration, have them be proud of me. And in anything I've done, whether it was on the soccer field or in any position that I've held, I haven't wanted just to be good. I've always worked hard to be the best. And I was the kid that when my friends were out partying, I was doing more drills, and I was, juggling more, and I was trying to do tricks, and I was, like a total geek, I guess. But I wanted to be the best. I saw that there were no women up on the Bolingbrook High School wall of fame, and I wanted to be the first. And so that's what I did to do whatever I needed to do to get there. So that was my vision. And then I put it into action, and every aspect of my life has been that way. And so there was one person, though, that has been a huge, she's not necessarily a politician, but like more of like an activist, that for me, one of my greatest things in life was to get to actually meet her and have her come out and, unbeknownst to me, like endorse my candidacy and, just be a big supporter of mine. And that was Dolores Huerta. And she was, she not was, because she still is. She's like in her late 80s, and she's still flying all around the country, advocating for, causes near and dear to her heart: women's rights, labor rights, civil rights. And she was right there behind Cesar Chavez, who, if you say Cesar Chavez, like every Hispanic and every non-Hispanic knows who that is. But Cesar Chavez, I truly believe, would have never been Cesar Chavez if it were not but for Dolores Huerta, who is doing like all the heavy lifting behind the scenes, but not getting the credit until now, in like her 80s, is when you start to hear more about what an amazing living legend this woman is. And so she was somebody that I admired pretty much my whole life, and never thinking I'd ever be in politics someday, but just the irony and the beauty that a couple of years ago, she was here in Chicago doing commercials for me. And who would have thought, right? So it's like, we all have these people that make you feel like you're a little kid meeting Mickey Mouse for the first time, like it's such a big deal to 6-year-olds to see how they light up. And that's how I felt with Dolores Huerta. It doesn't matter how far I advance in my public service, like meeting someone like her is just so humbling and honoring. And, so she's been a big role model to me. And then to have a picture that I will always cherish of my mother and Dolores Huerta with me, like, si se puede, it's just like the coolest thing on earth. So, yeah, she's someone that's very important to me, and we pray for her every night. My little boy, who you've all met like 10 times now in this video, she's in our prayers every night. And I want him to grow up knowing who this woman is,
Absolutely. Wow. I'm going to do some research myself, I think, on this amazing woman. My goodness.
Dolores Huerta. the best. She's got an incredible story. And yeah, like I said, honestly, she's like in her late 80s now, and she has not skipped a beat. She is like the most hardcore blast of energy you'll ever meet in your mind, and you do not want to mess with her.
I bet not. Well, we have some more really good questions here. So we just got another one in. This one says, what is it like to be a Latina leader in a white and male dominated field like finance? What is some advice you can give to any woman of color, either interested or already studying in the economic or finance field?
Yeah, set your expectations and your goals high. I met a young lady once, and this question reminded me of my answer here to you. I was giving a big speech in front of like 2,000 Hispanic young people at the United States Bank Leadership Institute event that they do every year. And she came up to me afterwards after I gave this speech. It was all about empowering and stuff. And she said, I wanted to ask you, it's very similar to that question, what's it like for you? How do you have the confidence to get up in front of a crowd of people that don't look like you and command the stage, or go into a meeting with all these, white politicians, males, right? And not feel like they're all looking at you wrong, or that feeling that you're an equal, right? That you should be in that room, because I'm the only Hispanic woman in my law class, which was surprising to me at the time, because you see a lot more women now in law school. But she said that her class had 2 girls in it. And, one of them was just mainstream, Caucasian girl who's great, real quiet. And it was her. And she always felt that, it was all these guys that they did not see her as an equal. And they never told her that, but she felt that. And I said, well, that's your first mistake, that you would be intimidated by them. What you should think is, wow, I'm the only Latina in this room full of guys. I am that much of a badass that I am in this room, and these guys are probably all intimidated of me. Like, change your mindset. You deserve to be in that room. How many people applied for that class that didn't get in to that class? You're in that class. So make the most of that opportunity, not just for yourself, but for every other girl like you who doesn't think that they have a place in that room. Bust that door down and get in that room. So for any other person of color, especially women of color, who are thinking that, there's not enough of us, I will, number one, say, yes, that's true. It's part of what I said in my speech, right? That I've broken all these barriers in my own career, but I don't want to be a unicorn. It's like I'm the only Hispanic controller, and here in Illinois, the only Hispanic statewide officer, but the only one in the country, right? And so it should not be that unusual to see a Latina in a position of power at a state elected level. But across the entire United States of America, out of all of the elected positions, we're talking about every elected position at every level, small or large, those elected positions are only held by 1%. 1% of those are Hispanic. And we make up now 19% of the national population. We make up 17% of the population in Illinois. And to tell you that I'm the only Latina controller in our country just doesn't seem right in 2021, right? So while, yes, cool, kudos for getting there, I want more people coming behind me. And I hope that if nothing else, the fact that I'm there and that I've proven that not only am I there, but I have completely crushed it on managing the state's finances. Since I've gotten there, we've had 2 credit upgrades, the first 2 in 20 years. We got credit upgrades in the middle of a global pandemic when other states saw their finances move backwards. Since I've been controller, prior to me, 8 credit downgrades in a row in 2 years. We hadn't had an upgrade in 20 years. I've been your controller. I don't know anybody money right now. I'm current. That $17 billion bill backlog has been wiped out. And I did it without using federal stimulus funds, just by doing my job better than anyone before me. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm not going to pretend that we have not completely done an awesome job in this role. And I say that not to pat myself on the back, but if anybody out there thinks that Latina women can't take an office and just completely kick butt at it, they're wrong and they should just look right here. And I'm not the only one who can do it. So you should say, you get the opportunity to be in that room. You're going to make sure everyone knows that you deserve to be in that room. So for me, it's easy. I know I'm just as smarter than most of the guys I'm in the room with. So I shouldn't apologize for that. And they're going to have to make sure that they bring their A game to any meeting that I'm at. And so that's just how my, maybe it's the soccer that taught me about that competitive spirit and the level of confidence, because you work hard to be the best. So you deserve to be playing amongst the best. And I would say to any young lady who's looking at me thinking about, well, how do you do it? Or how can I do it? Is just believe in yourself. Believe in yourself, but also put in the time and put in the effort to educate yourself on whatever your subject matter is. Because if you want to be great at finance, then you need to learn about it and not just, read the cliff notes. You need to really deep dive, and you need to care about this stuff, and you need to show and that you do know your stuff, and that you're proficient in whatever it is you decide to pursue, whether it's finance or engineering or politics, right? So learn your craft, fine tune it, hone your skills, and then put them into action, helping others.
Wow, just drop the mic there. Great answer. That's there's so much there for us to chew on and be inspired by. Seriously, thank you. Here's another one. Hello, Comptroller Mendoza. Your speech was amazing. I am one of those vulnerable people impacted by the budget crisis. Special needs services were deep in debt. I understand that you dealt with prioritizing human service providers and ensuring that these services didn't close down. What was the hardest part of managing said priority?
Well, that's a great question. I will tell you that it became very clear to me on my very first day as controller. It almost seems like it was a gift from God for me, because I had just been sworn in. It's a true story, just been sworn in. My family was all surrounding me. My little boy was like 2.5, 3 years old, and 3.5, I guess. And I just came off the stage and I looked at my phone, which we all do now, right? Am I the only person who wakes up and like first thing you do is look at your phone? It's so wrong. But I just come off this huge moment and I look at my phone and I had an email, my very first email now officially as the controller. And it was this woman who lived in Edwardsville, so in the Metro East. And just for her privacy, I'll say, we'll call her Mary. I've told this story many times, and I before I couldn't tell the story without completely breaking down, but I've told it so many times now that I feel like I can keep my composure. But so I'm reading this email, and I hadn't even seen my official office yet, because reminding you, I'd just taken the oath, so I hadn't actually been in the office. I was on my way to the office in the Capitol, but off the stage reading this email. And she says, her name is Mary, that she is in dire need of help from the controller, that she had been trying for, many, at least over the last 1.5 years to get help and had not gotten any help. And that she was incredibly vulnerable because she required a 24-hour ventilation and feeding assistance, right? That she has a debilitating illness that she was diagnosed with at the age of 4, and that at this point now, as a grown woman, she's lost all ability to have any kind of motor function and is 100% fully dependent on, very expensive critical care. And so this email was just so beautifully written that I was like, wow, how is this person who's so sick able to like communicate all this, right? And so towards the end of her email, she said, and just so you know, I'm attaching a photo of myself, just so you know that I'm a real person. And I don't know if she meant for me to read that line this way, but it was like a punch in the gut, right? That somebody would have to say that I'm attaching a photo of myself, so you know that I'm a real person, right? Which is so important to personify the problem. That when we're talking about $16.7 billion, to me, it was never a number on a spreadsheet. It was a story of millions of people and millions, over 1 million people who lost services because of government dysfunction. And people like Mary, who literally their lives depended on the government not being in a state of dysfunction and her being able to get her medical services on time. So she told me that the state was so far behind on paying her bills that if this was on December 5th, that if her insurance companies did not get payment from the state by December 18th, they were going to shut off all of her services. No more help for her. they were done on December 21st. And you're talking about Christmas, right? So it's essentially a death sentence in her mind. She said, I want to live. I don't want to die, right? So this was my first email. And then the picture of her had like a dot on her forehead. And she told me that the reason on her email that the reason she has a dot is because that dot is what allows her to put her thoughts into words through a technology software program, right? Because she literally could not move at all. But you could tell then how intelligent this woman was, like super smart, but trapped in a body that completely did not work for her. And as a result, completely dependent on the state doing its job of taking care of our most vulnerable citizens, right? So my first act as controller was immediately sitting my new team down and saying, how do we help save this woman's life? Because this is absurd. And we did that, but before I couldn't tell the story because I would start crying just thinking about her because it's very emotional for me. But more so, not even just Mary. What made me really lose my stuff all the time was thinking about how many people were worse off than Mary, that from a mental capacity, they would never be able to communicate with me and advocate for themselves the way she was that day. And how many people were going to die over the next year and had already died before I became controller because they were victims to government dysfunction, right? And so when people ask me, how did you do what you did? I had every single waking minute of my day. I'd go to bed thinking about Mary and I'd wake up thinking about Mary and people like her and what I needed to do to make sure they didn't die. I never thought when I ran for controller that I would be making life and death decisions on people's healthcare every day. And essentially that's what I walked into. And as much as I've been around this, political landscape so many years, I still wasn't prepared for that gut punch like a minute after taking my oath. But I thank God for that because it set the tone for the entirety of my term as controller. It set the moral compass so strong for me. And it made me so incensed that anybody could read a communication from this woman and not be completely compelled to fix it. Right. And so that just shows that the moral compass was completely backwards in that office. So I took it as a source of pride to rework the moral compass. And I've proven that by doing the right thing by people, by investing in people, by prioritizing the most vulnerable, which should be the number one job of state government, period. If we do nothing else right, is to take care of the most vulnerable who cannot fend for themselves, then we're investing in people, and that's a good thing. And guess what? I was able to pay down the bill backlog and still take care of people as a first and foremost priority. So I believe that by doing the morally correct thing, you're more often than not also doing the fiscally sound thing. And as a Democrat, I'm very proud to say that, we're never going to make money off of treating sick people, but that's not what government's about. Our first priority is taking care of those folks and then seeing where we can save money and where we can create efficiencies and where we can, do better. But we should be judged honestly by how the most helpless person in our state is faring under our watch. And so that's been the motivating thing for me. That's why for me, prioritizing social service providers and anyone who deals with or is affected by a disability, as they're at the front of the line. No apologies about it.
Absolutely. You can tell how much you care, and there must be a weight to this as well. So this kind of ties into maybe our last question that we can sneak in here. But what are some ways that you handle those pressures and just the overall stress management techniques maybe you employ, especially being a Latina woman again in such a significant role?
Oh, thank you. That's a fun question. So I love to cook. And that is like a massive stress reliever for me. And I would say I never got to do it more in my life than during the pandemic. So while you think that things were worse during the pandemic, and for me they were, because not only was I managing the state's fiscal crisis, but my oldest brother, who I mentioned was a police officer, he almost died from COVID. He caught it on his birthday, actually. He came home from work with a cough and 2 days later was hospitalized. He's only 56, and he spent 41 days at Northwestern Memorial fighting for his life, and then another 31 days at an inpatient rehab center, slowly, I would say surviving, not necessarily even getting better, but they discharged him after that, 72 days. to my care. And so I wasn't just a controller managing billions in state debt. I became his primary caregiver, taking him to every single hospital visit and doctor's appointment every single day except Sundays. My husband, David, was awesome. And he bought me like this clip-on desk that went into my steering wheel so that I could do all my work from the car while he was getting his therapies. And so I didn't skip a beat, because guess what? That's what we do, especially as women. No offense to you as a awesome young man, but we have to figure out, just life throws you not a dinged lemon, but literally like a rotten complete lemon. And somehow you have to figure out how to make delicious lemonade out of it. So you can't ever lose your spirit to like see things get better. And I saw my brother surviving that, not as like a burden, but as a blessing, and that I could get to take him to his hospital visits. And he lost both his kidneys. He had 5 mini strokes in his brain because of COVID. He'll be on dialysis the rest of his life, 3 days a week. But he's doing better. And I mean, his life is going to be different forevermore because of COVID. So please, if you haven't been vaccinated, don't mess around with this stuff. Like, I'm living the consequences of somebody who wasn't vaccinated because they weren't available yet. And I know a guy that was relatively healthy and, an awesome cop is now like a different person because of this. And it's preventable. So take it seriously, because I live it every day. But you can imagine how much more important having an avenue to release some of that massive stress was. And so cooking, I became like, I might as well have my own cooking show. I'm like an awesome chef here in the house. It's fun. I also love to go skydiving. So you could probably sense some level of energy from me. But I love like high adrenaline stuff. So I love jumping out of airplanes. I love going snowboarding, perhaps things that most people don't necessarily consider relaxing. But for me, that's like, I don't know, maybe it's because I have so much energy. I just got to get it out and be like, woo. But I also love live music, which has been impeded because of the pandemic. I may be the only elected official who's actually crowd surfed out of a Rage Against the Machine concert. So, I mean, I feel like I'm very, very into my job, but I also love to have fun. And my family is awesome. My little boy keeps me very busy, and my husband is like the best husband you could ever hope to have. We go skydiving together. We go skiing and snowboarding together. We go running. We're very active. We love to cycle. We do 150-mile bike rides. So yeah, I stay active, and getting that out. I don't play soccer so much anymore. Now I'm assistant coach for my little boy. But I love the sport, and I still stay active and try to stay fit and burn off the pressures of the job and the frustrations, right, that come with it through healthy avenues. So I'd encourage people, find something you love to do and just do it as much as you can.
Absolutely. Well, I hate that this went by so fast and we have to end it. This was awesome. Thank you so much again. I think that'll probably wrap it up for us tonight. Thank you to everyone.
I do want to say one more thing.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm talking to like a younger group here, right?
Yes.
I would say one of the key successes to my happiness has been finding the right partner. Because if you can imagine how stressful my job is, it would be like untenable if I came home not happy to come home. And so of all the decisions I've ever made in my life, of all of them, the most important and consequential was who I decided to spend my life with. And so I know that may sound corny, but I'm telling you, if you're in a relationship that is high drama, get out. If you find a person who supports you, who inspires you, and who's inspired by you, and isn't intimidated by that, but wants to be a part of that, who like encourages your dreams and supports them and doesn't cause drama in your life, don't run away from that. Embrace it, because you have to think that for the rest of your life, you're either at work or you're coming home. And stress at work, that's just work, but stress at home, that is a game changer. So just saying, you're young, think about it. I didn't get married till later in life. And I was, I guess, 38 or 39 when I finally got married. And I'm so happy that I waited, because I was able to get my career, going exactly the way I wanted. I knew who I was. I didn't have to be defined by the relationship. And my husband came in my life at the right time, and he had never married either, and he didn't have kids. We just lucked out, right? It doesn't work out that way for everybody. But I will say that don't rush into something because you think you might miss an opportunity. Wait for the right opportunity, because you're going to have to live with that decision for a long time. And if you get it wrong, it's going to kind of stink for the rest of your life. So I know that wasn't part of the discussion, but since you asked about my happiness, it's fun to do all these things, but to have someone who you can do them with and you have fun and not fight, that's the key.
Absolutely. I've had my wife 3 years ago, and I can attest to everything you're saying. And I wouldn't have understood it before then, but now I totally do. So I'm sure everyone who's married or with a significant other can definitely attest to that too. So thank you so much.
Sure.
I'll also say thank you to our student organizations, Nuestra Casa, who are here as well, asked some really good questions, and also our history and philosophy and political science department students who are here, and then also women's soccer, who is also, I think, joining in a big group and watching as well.
Awesome.
So thank you all for being here and also for co-sponsoring this event with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And of course, thank you again, Comptroller Mendoza, for being here. This was so awesome. I think we're going to have to ask you back soon because.
Oh yeah. So if I go visit you guys, I want the girls to, show me some, soccer love. I got to go out there and kick the ball around or something.
Oh, it's going to happen. We're going to make it.
All right.
Don't
Awesome.
even worry about it. All right. Thank you again, everyone. And thanks for coming. We look forward to reading all your responses. I know you have a lot to write about, given everything we talked about today. So
yeah, I think you should give everybody an A. All right. So just, make it easy.
I'll think about it. We'll see. At least B+. So
Okay. Very cool. All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
bye.